Hello, everybody. So thanks for the introduction. My name is Jeremy Park, and I am here to share to you my story about setting up a virtual company. We have a fairly unique business model at CORE Geomatics. We actually don't have a physical office space. We operate completely virtual and remote. And as the world is moving towards this more digital and kind of virtual environment, the association had asked me to come in and present some of my experiences, as well as some of the challenges of being part of this organization. Now, I realize that there are some of you in this room that might be more advanced in this space than I am. And if that's so, I'd love to get together with you after the presentation sometime, maybe share some notes in this area, because we're always looking for ways that we can improve our operation. There may be some of you in this room that have an existing office that is looking to move it into a virtual or semi-virtual environment. There also may be some of you in this room that are some up-and-coming entrepreneurs that are looking to start a venture of your own soon. And if that's the case, I hope that by sharing my story with you, you can learn from our successes and some of our failures in helping you guys become more successful. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to get a little bit of consensus in the room here today. Just a quick show of hands. Does anybody currently work from home right now? Oh, okay. Wow, there's quite a few of you guys. That's good. Good to see. Okay, so for those that don't work from home right now, the ones that are kind of working from an office, do you think that you could do your job in its current capacity from home? Show of hands. Okay. And I guess disregarding that, if you had the choice to work from an office or from a home, would you guys want to work from home? Show of hands. Yeah, and there's a lot of benefits to working from home, and it is kind of a great place to be. And it's becoming more of a trend in this world as well. So according to a Gallup poll in 2015, actually 40% of all the workers that they surveyed in the United States had either worked from home right now or had worked from home at one time in their career. So it's definitely becoming more impactful in our day-to-day lives, and that is actually a fourfold increase from only a couple days before. So I want to take you guys back to 2008, 10 years ago. Seems like a long ways away. And if you guys recall back then, we were in the midst of one of the worst economic crashes in modern-day history. What kind of started at first of the crash in the housing market in the United States turned into all the subprime lenders, which spread into the big banks at Wall Street and eventually kind of creeped into every other industry in every other country in the world. If you guys seen The Big Short, you probably kind of know the history of this. And nobody was sheltered, not even Canada. And I remember where I was at this time. I was an art incling student working for a land survey company based out of Edmonton. And I was working on a project in Fort McMurray. And we were on a job site out there. And I remember just the price of oil crashing like $5 to $8 a barrel every single day. At the beginning when we started, the price of oil was about $145, and it tumbled down to about $35 within only a few months. And I remember just kind of turning to my survey assistant at the time, because it was just the two of us in the bush back then. We were like, wow, this is crazy. What is the world coming to? Having said that, we were pretty isolated from the rest of the world. Ironically, in the middle of Canada's energy heartland, we didn't really know what was happening in the world around us. So we just kind of put our heads down, we finished the project, and we came back to Calgary only a few weeks later. When we got back to Calgary, I came back to our office, and we immediately started to feel the effects of what what this downturn was doing to our company. A lot of the projects that were scheduled were either being canceled or withdrawn. And I remember there were clients, and we worked for a lot of energy producers at the time, they were sending out letters right across the industry pretty indiscriminately, whether you be the drill rigs or the truck drivers, surveyors kind of caught in the middle of that, telling every single one of their suppliers, you need to cut your rates by 30 to 50%. We cannot survive in this type of low price environment, and therefore everybody needs to drop their prices. And I remember having these management meetings where we would take these letters and we would kind of calculate, okay, so with this rate sheet, we can only charge X dollars. And we look at our costs and we see what it costs to operate a field crew to go do that project, and that costs Y dollars. And the math just didn't make any sense. Every project we would take, we would actually lose money. Having said that, our revenue had dropped down almost 50% in the span of only a couple months. So we couldn't afford to lose what little revenue we could capture because we needed that revenue to keep the company going. So we ended up taking these projects at a loss. And what ended up following was a lot of closed-door meetings. You'd see the branch manager, he would be behind a closed door, only for the door to open again, which would be followed by somebody packing up their desk, putting everything in a box, and walking out the door, never to be seen again in that company. It wasn't a very good time to be in the industry. So as much as Wall Street and the rest of the world were devastated during these times, there was actually an area across the nation in this small place called Silicon Valley that actually a lot of cool innovations were happening. You guys recall in 2007 when Steve Jobs came up and announced the invention of one of these, the iPhone. And we didn't know it at the time, but that would forever change how we interact with this technology. We now had the power of a computer and of Google searches just in our pockets. At around the same time, Facebook, a company called Facebook, was starting to gain some traction, building up more online users. And for most of us, Facebook was actually our first step into that online world. A lot of us were kind of shy to go there. Facebook kind of brought it mainstream, and a lot of us ended up getting online profiles, and it really changed the way that we interacted with people. It became what we now term social media, which is a new term for this type of technology. Though not as significant as what I had just mentioned before, there was this small company called Dropbox that came out in 2008, and it wasn't as big or as impactful as what I had mentioned, but it was revolutionary in itself because it really brought this idea of a cloud storage system being available to the mainstream consumer. You guys recall if you had the iPhones, for the longest time we couldn't figure out how did you get the photos off the phone and onto the computer. And Dropbox was kind of a solution to solve for that. So while this was all happening, a few of my peers, we got together at a local pub for a beer. And as all surveyors do when we get together for a drink, we like to talk about surveying. And the question that we asked ourselves was, okay, so we understand this low price environment that everybody was suffering from at the time. How do we reinvent the survey business model so it can be competitive in those times? And given all the new technologies that were coming out, could there be an opportunity to change how the survey model is? Also, if you think about it, what better time to start a company than in the middle of a recession? A lot of good people that are normally unavailable are now suddenly available. Survey equipment is very expensive. Now you had an opportunity to buy some really good used survey equipment for a really good deal. And most importantly, we had a lot of clients that, everybody was so cost sensitive at the time that they were looking for options, for suppliers that could provide them some sort of value. So there was definitely opportunity there. So we officially launched CORE Geomatics in the year 2009. There was 4 partners that were initially involved, including our president, Doug Sharp. And as a risky startup, we wanted to minimize the amount of upfront investment that we would be putting into this company. It wasn't about us being this virtual company from the onset. We just wanted to minimize risks. So not signing a big lease for an office space just kind of made sense. So we took whatever funds that we could. We bought a used truck. We bought some laptops, some equipment, CAD licenses, and away we went. Though we weren't intentional about being virtual, what we were intentional about was being paperless. We had this philosophy that we really wanted to drive within our founding team was to never hit print. And again, it's not about anything against paper per se, but what we saw in our industry from prior to starting CORE was paper kind of epitomized waste. We saw in our old companies the large-scale plotters just running continuously pretty much all day, only most of it to be ending up in the recycling bin. I remember being in the field, and these crews would receive their big paper folders of all their plans, 100 plans. They'd kind of leaf through it. They'd pull out the one survey plan that they need, and they'd chuck the rest back into their truck with all the other garbage. And we figured that by eliminating this paper, that was kind of our first step to cutting our costs in making this more efficient business. And because being paperless is in itself a digital medium that involves transferring information electronically, it allowed us to keep growing and adding more team members working out of their homes, and that kind of naturally became the foundation of which our virtual office was built upon. So after operating for a couple years like this, the world started to pull itself out of recession, and the economy in Alberta in 2010 made a sharp recovery, and it was just humming again along nicely. And we had the luxury of having these really large-scale energy projects just being announced almost on a daily basis. We went through what they call hockey stick growth. So we grew from 4 to 75 people in just a few years. Now, I will admit, as most people in this room who have well-built, successful companies, the growth that we experienced was mostly luck. We were surfing the waves of a surging economy, and all we had to do was just stay on the surfboard. Having said that, being virtual really did offer a lot of benefits to sustain us through this growth, and I'm going to outline some of those benefits here. So the first one is a global workforce. So if you think about a hot economy, it is incredibly hard to find good people. In a traditional office setting, you are kind of constrained to hiring people within your geographical area. People have to get to and from work. In a virtual office, you don't really have that restriction. You can hire anybody anywhere in the world as long as they have two things. One, the skills that you're looking for, and two, a decent internet connection. And this works really well when you think about the different regional economies that are happening at the same time. For example, when things were really hot in Alberta, and we couldn't find people in Alberta, we were hiring people from BC, we were hiring people from the Maritimes, we had a staff in Australia, we had staff in France, we had staff in Mexico. We had this one guy that worked out of Nanaimo, and he was a drafting tech, and he worked for us for 6 months, and he didn't even tell us, but he ended up moving to China, and he continued to work from China without us even knowing. He just kept the same clock going, and really in the end, it didn't really matter once we found out because he was still getting his work done. The second benefit of a virtual operation is that saving money is actually good for the environment. With a virtual operation, we don't have a building. So there's no leases, no parking fees, no utility bills, and all these other costs associated with running a building. We don't purchase large-scale plotters. We don't purchase the very expensive ink to fill those large-scale plotters. We don't have a lot of administration and overhead staff to upkeep the building. We don't have receptionists, office administrators, janitors, IT techs, equipment managers, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these cost savings that we are able to keep, we can allocate those to different growth initiatives, or even potentially profit sharing amongst the shareholders. And as much as we like to focus on the cost savings, we're also very proud of the fact that every time we don't hit print, every time we don't use energy to heat or cool the building, every time our team members don't fill up their vehicles with gasoline to drive to and from work, we actually, in a small way, are contributing to a more greener and sustainable working office environment. Third benefit is that team members really do enjoy working from home. And happier team members equals higher productivity. So for me, there is honestly no better feeling than getting up at 7:30, 8 o'clock. I kind of roll out of bed, put on a pot of coffee, and jump on my computer while still in my pajamas. I scroll through my phone, I read through my news feed, I see the big traffic jam happening in Calgary from the overnight snowstorm. I chuckle a little bit. And then I turn on some music, the music that nobody else likes except for me, and then I start working away. We have team members from all different types of demographics. Some of our team members have kids that they really love the flexibility where they can drop their kids off at school, work at 9 to 3, go pick up their kids after school, spend time with them, have supper with them, and then jump back on the computer in the evening time. We have a lot of the millennial group that they all like to wake up really late, later than me, and then they kind of go to their favorite coffee shop, they work from there, then they disappear in the evening time, they jump back on at night, and they're often working till kind of 2, 3 in the morning. The truth is, it doesn't matter who you are. Those that enjoy the autonomy, enjoy the flexibility, are self-driven, will thrive in this virtual environment. Those that are not those things, those that require direction for every step to take, that can't make a decision on their own, those people will not be successful in the virtual environment. And as managers or owners of a virtual company, it is very key that we can identify who will be successful and who will be not very early in the stages, hopefully at hiring stage, and then make decisions based on that. And what we found is that for the people that thrive in this environment, that do well, productivity working from home is actually higher than productivity working from an office space. If you think about it, a lot of our team really enjoy, or they don't enjoy, but a lot of our team work a lot of overtime. And it's a lot easier to work overtime when you're working from your house as opposed to working overtime from an office across the city. And they continually work late at night all the time. Not that we're slave drivers or anything, they enjoy doing it. Probably the biggest challenge that we face with a virtual team is maintaining a strong culture and keeping the communication lines open. We realize that coming to work is more than just earning a paycheck for most people. It's about part of that social fabric of who we are as human beings, and we need to be part of something that is bigger than ourselves. And in most corporations or most organizations, culture and identity just kind of rub off naturally from the leaders of that organization as we work in close proximity to those people, maybe for the good, maybe for the bad. In a virtual company, we really need to be intentional about spreading that culture and identity to our people. We don't have the kitchen table. We don't have the water cooler to be able to have those kind of passerby conversations. It's very difficult to have these annual events, like annual parties or golf tournaments when people are working from all around the globe. So we try to address this in a few ways. The first way is we constantly ram our core values into our people's heads. So the core values of our organization are there: creativity, opportunity, relationships, and excellence. And there is nobody at CORE that works for CORE that does not know those values. And what we do is we have an online board that we post stories all the time about our team members that are exuding these core values and give them shout-outs. The second thing we do is we are always sharing to our team members what our quarterly goals are, our annual and our 5-year goal targets are, as an organization and making sure everybody is on board with those goals so that we're all moving in the same page forward. And the third thing we do is we are always looking for new software and IT solutions to help bridge the gap of that communication. I'm going to share to you a few of the softwares we use in the next slides. I want to make a note. I am not endorsed by any of these software companies, so I'm not receiving any benefit from them. It is a good, honest review. So as I mentioned, one of the downsides of working in a virtual office is that tendency to feel isolation. As a land surveyor, we are privileged in the fact that we cross many different nodes of communication throughout our day-to-day. So we're always talking with clients, we're always talking with government, we're talking with our field crews, our CAD team, our accountants, and pretty much everybody we have those interactions with. What we need to be sensitive about is there are people within our team that do not have that many nodes of communication in their day-to-day. So for example, the CAD tech might only speak with their project manager and a plan checker, and that's all they know in the company, really. So they don't know who else works for the company. They don't know how big the company is, and they kind of just work in this bubble that they're in. So to solve for this, we turned to this software. It's called CORE, and it's a great program that kind of resembles a floor plan of an office. So you log in at the start of your day, and if you want to go talk to somebody, so everybody's represented by this dot or avatar, and if I wanted to talk to somebody else in the office, I would move my dot into that person's office, and we would automatically be having a voice over IP conversation. We can screen share, we can video chat. It's very collaborative. You can see people here having boardroom meetings, just like how normal offices have boardroom meetings. And in this way, you can really see who's in the company, who's talking with who. You can see who's online, who's offline, who's online but away from their keyboard because it indicates that they're idle. And this has been a big game changer to our organization because it really tangibly gives the feeling of what a virtual office looks like. So somebody were to ask me, Jeremy, what does your virtual office look like? I would say our virtual office looks like this. Another software package that we use is a software called Slack. And CORE is a great way for our office team to communicate, but our field crews tend to gravitate towards the Slack software. And the reason why is because their field crews kind of can send and receive messages while they're digging for pins, while they're moving in and out of cell phone reception. It's more of a conducive software for their type of communication. It's pretty much like text messaging on steroids is what it is. And it's also very useful for office team members as well. What will happen when a company moves virtual is there will be this phenomenon that occurs that your email usage or email consumption will just skyrocket. What could normally be solved very quickly of just going next door and being like having a quick few-minute conversation can turn into a long list of email chains, and nothing's worse than being caught on a CC list of like 2 people talking and it's 20 emails deep and you're just kind of like, I'll just pick up the phone and call the guy. But in reality, people gravitate to those type of texting communications, and email is probably not the best medium for that. Slack is a much better conversational type tool. And it's really cool with Slack. It has a mobile app as well, so that you can be on your desktop, you could be chatting with somebody, and then you go grab a coffee, and you can kind of bring that conversation with you and carry on that conversation on your app. So we use a cloud server for our storage and our files, and the software that we use is called Box. And for those that have used softwares like Dropbox or Google Drive, this is pretty much the same thing, except it's geared more towards enterprises, whereas those are more geared towards consumers. For those of you that maybe work in an office setting, and you've had that experience of working from home, maybe a few times a month or whatever, how have you guys been accessing your files from your office? And there's a couple solutions for this that are kind of more in a traditional sense. One way to do it is people use what's called a VPN. So they VPN onto a computer that is local to wherever their corporate server is, and their computer is essentially a remote. So you are controlling a computer on where the office is, and it is streaming back picture onto your monitor. And this works well with documents like PDFs and survey plans. When you start getting into more heavy graphics CAD softwares, it can be brutal because there's a lag, there's a slowness, and it just wouldn't be able to do it. With Box, how it operates is that you have a local folder that is downloaded onto your hard drive, and that folder is synchronized to the cloud server. So what that means is that you can be operating on these files at local speeds. And if you have a CAD drawing, you're working on that in a local speed, you close it, and what happens is that it automatically uploads that file onto the cloud, which then automatically downloads that same file to everybody else that's synchronized to that folder. So everybody has access to the latest information. Our field crews also use their iPhone and iPad apps while they're in the field. They love it because it really gives them the power of being able to search through the entire company server just by using their apps. So, even with our progressive philosophy on what it means to have this virtual office, we always felt at some point that, having a real office would somehow kind of legitimize us as a real company. And what we did was in 2012, we signed a lease for this physical office space, a spot close to downtown Calgary, and it had a lot of really cool coffee shops, had a lot of local great restaurants, enough to satisfy even the most hardcore hipster. What we wanted to do is we wanted to set up this shared workspace. So we didn't want to get rid of our virtual model per se. People were really enjoying that. But in case people wanted to kind of leave the house and go into more of a kind of a face-to-face setting, we wanted to set up an environment where they could do that. All you had to do was bring your laptop. We had the monitors, the desks, the chairs. Everything was already set up that they could just kind of plug and play. We hired a receptionist to kind of man this office, and her job was to answer phone calls and collect the mail. But our clients were so used to just calling our direct lines that nobody really called the corporate office, so really all that person was doing was just collecting the mail. And we invested a lot of money into office furnitures, big screen TVs, coffee machines, all sorts of cool stuff. We wanted the place to be really cool. And what ended up happening was something really interesting. Nobody ever came. Nobody ever came to the office. It was an empty office. We had one person come to the office. He was this drafter that we hired. And before he came working for CORE, he worked at this big engineering firm. And he was very stubborn in saying, I cannot work from home. I have to work from an office space. And we were like, that's great. We have this space available. You can come in and out as much as you please. So every day since he was hired, he punched in at 8 o'clock. He punched out at 5 o'clock. He was sometimes the only person that was there at the office. He did that for about 3 months until the first snowstorm hit in Calgary. And then he emailed me in the morning. He said, Jeremy, I think I'm going to just work from home today. I'm like, that's great. You work from home. He has not come back to the office ever since. So he has worked at home ever since. So let's jump forward to 2014. And after the economy had been humming along really nicely for the past 4 years, all of a sudden we had this big oversupply in oil and gas products. And that led to the second big commodity crash in a decade. So Alberta, being this boom and bust economy, was now officially back in bust mode. And just like how it was in 2008, we went through the same cycles. Projects getting canceled, projects getting delayed. Our clients were asking all their suppliers to cut their rates back. Just to kind of give an indication of how bad it got, I read this article where there was this gas producer in Alberta, a pretty large gas producer, and they're used to drilling gas and selling it. But because gas prices were so low, they, instead of selling it to the market for next to nothing, they actually built this warehouse where they had computers dedicated to just mine Bitcoin. And they were using the gas that they were drilling to power this facility that they had. So I thought it was kind of neat, but at the same time, it gives a picture of how bad it is to be in that industry. And maybe folks in Vancouver and on the island, you guys might not have felt this crash in the commodity prices, but I know if there's folks in Northeast BC, those that kind of come from a more commodity-based economy, you guys have definitely felt the pain that we did in Alberta. And I pulled up this funny graphic here. I Google image searched it. I typed in Alberta recession, and this came up. And looks like a bunch of laid-off Alberta guys in their pickup trucks, because we all love pickup trucks. They're all leaving Alberta. They're going somewhere. I don't know where they're going, but looks like we got rain clouds back there. So I'm assuming they might be heading over to Vancouver. I don't know. So even with our virtual office, we grew fat with overhead costs. And when the economy tanked, we had to do our own round of large layoffs. And personally, it was a really tough time in my career. Lots of sleepless nights. And it's difficult to see something you invested so much time in to build, the people that you invested so much time to train and you developed, really personal relationships with. And then you had to just kind of cut everything overnight because that's kind of what we had to do to survive. Just to give you an idea how much we slashed, before 2014, we were at about 75 people, and we had to drop that down to about, we were down to about 25 people in 2015. So it was almost a 65% cut that we had to do within our organization. And our core group of owners had to get together during this time, really on the brink of survival. And we were forced to kind of come to a reckoning of our own. We were a company that started off in a recession, and we had this recessionary, tactic. But somehow we kind of lost the way. And how do we get back to that core strength in order to survive the current recession that was happening right now? So what we did was we sublet the office space, and we went back to being this lean, fully virtual kind of machine. And we focused on diversification through the money that we were able to save from the sublease. We made some key hires in some different areas, some different industries to try to get ourselves off of that kind of energy pill, I guess. And it's been a long journey and tough journey back, but I'm glad to say that we've kind of been able to slowly pull ourselves back onto our feet. We've now doubled in size since our all-time low. And when I look back, and even in the road ahead, because we're not out of it yet, but I don't think we would have been able to survive had it been for the virtual environment that we could lean upon. I had a lot of colleagues in Alberta that, they built these wonderful survey companies. They grew immensely during the good times, and they got themselves locked into these big leases to house all their team members. And when things crashed and they had to let go of a lot of the people, just like everybody else did in the industry, they were stuck with these massive leases on these huge buildings that they just couldn't afford to pay. And a lot of them ended up having to close their doors or maybe file for bankruptcy because of that. So CORE could have easily been in that situation had it not been for the virtual office that we could lean upon. So looking back, some of the biggest lessons that I learned through this whole journey was, one, don't be afraid to try new things. There's often times in this space where we have to look for new solutions, most of them being IT solutions, to overcome that physical barrier gap. And you might be like, oh, I need an HR software, I need an accounting software, what can I do? You Google it, there's going to be 1,000 results, and it can be a little bit overwhelming to know which one to choose. But don't be struck with analysis paralysis. Do your due diligence, figure out what's the best software to go ahead that fits your team, and then just go with it. Get behind it. But at the same time, you want to continue to look at the other options that are coming up, because that space is moving so fast, and there are often better solutions that are always coming out that you want to be able to take advantage of. Second thing is set your expectations with your team members early on. As I said, there are people that will thrive in this environment, and there are people that won't thrive. And what we learned was we really needed to focus on the results. It's not about focusing on people's timesheets. It's not about are they online from 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock. The benefit of the virtual office is the time flexibility. So the question really comes down to, are they getting the work done? If they are, then that's great. If they're not, then something has to be done about that. And the third thing that we learned is just kind of enjoy the ride. Like, you know, don't be afraid of the technology. You know, it's good technology is made to make our lives easier, not harder. And people that are kind of averse to technology, a lot of people say, I don't really understand it. That's probably because it's not a good technology. The technology is supposed to be simple, and that's how people embrace it, and that's how it really thrives in the organization. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time and listening to me today.